The Zoom call with Neat today. That was good. Councillor Goring was with me too. That was good. Okay, I'll call the special regional council meeting to order. Please be advised that today's meeting is available for the public to attend virtually. It is being streamed and recorded. Can I get a motion, please, to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Roper, seconded by Councillor Penny. All those in favor? Carried. Business arising. 2021 preliminary budget. Mr. Barry.
Thank you, Mayor. So as a continuation on from the discussions we had on Wednesday, or leaving off, we ended off on Wednesday. There was discussion regarding funds that were carried forward from last year, or can be carried forward from last year, as a result of expenditures or expenses that didn't occur related to COVID. So i.e. the rec center closure extended for some time. So we have the ability to capture about $660,000 for unexpended costs from 2020 directly related to COVID, or savings directly related to COVID. Would also include some council travel, et cetera, et cetera. And then additionally, the application of the grant funds for the eligible areas from 2020 also increased the surplus for 2020. So when you carry forward those funds, including that 660 of unused expenditures last year, and factor in the remaining grant funds this year, Council has funds to utilize in 2021 to the tune of $2.167 million, as you'll see on the spreadsheet here I have for you in front of you. The preliminary budget utilizes 409,000 of that already to offset potential revenue losses that we have projected for 2021. The landing fees at the airport, for example, some lease arrangements that Council has approved last year into this year as the pandemic goes on, and then additionally anticipated revenue losses at the rec center that we just don't expect to occur. So any losses in revenues that we projected, we've offset with these funds, and a portion of that is grant funds that were remaining from last year. That essentially gives Council a $1.758 million of funds that can be utilized in this year and or future years to help offset potential future COVID related expenses, or and additionally, if we see expenses that we don't expect to incur this year, because even though right now we all hope and expect and hope that we'll see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel with COVID, we're not counting anything until it actually occurs. So the discussion on Wednesday was relating to what amount would Council wish to apply to this year's budget, and there was lots of discussion in terms of how that impacts the levy and so on and so forth. So what we did as part of today's discussion is we looked at what we are looking at for potential expenses in 2021 that are already in the budget document as part of the operations. And we're just to kind of give Council a ballpark and understanding that these are expenses that we wouldn't incur unless wouldn't incur if COVID wasn't, we weren't in the middle of the pandemic currently and weren't dealing with the restrictions. So not that Council needs to use these or use this as a reference, but it was just to provide some guidance in case Council wished to utilize it to make a decision if they wish to use some of that remaining funds, and if so, how much.
Can we speak to the accuracy of the projections here going out for 2021? So I know that we had to make some decisions last year when we were unsure what the impact of COVID was going to be. Now I guess we have a little bit more clarity, but we still don't know how long COVID-19 will last and what exactly the impact will be on the budget. So I'm just wondering, I guess, A, how were our projections calculated, the impact of COVID-19, and maybe you could speak to how accurate those projections are.
I'm not going to give you a percentage, but the accuracy, and Ryan can chime in too here, but the unused, or sorry, the reduction in revenues are based on a combination of some historical data in terms of use of the rec center, what we would expect or not expect. So for example, typically we would get revenues for weddings or functions or rentals of the facility, which we're not expecting this year. So we put those at a value at 0. Then you reduce usage based on current usage, current hours, and that's a bit more of an estimate. Landing fees are at 0 until the point, until our council has the resolution, which is till August or September, I believe. So that number could, so there is a little bit of revenue at the airport, so that could change because council can elect to extend that number at a later date, or sorry, extend that date. And additionally, we don't know what the fees would look like for that matter. So again, there were some estimations there. In terms of costs, these are costs that are budgeted based on actual expected costs based on either numbers or quotes that we have, or janitorial, for example. We know that unless restrictions were to change or increase, if we had to increase, for example, when high touch areas are cleaned, that would increase the janitorial requirements, for example. So this is how we factor in those numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Yeah. And it's not working. So back to this 1758 it's a discussion that council needs to have in terms of, do you want to use any? If so, how much? Any remainder, we discussed on Wednesday that we would use a financial stabilization reserve account to put those funds in, the remainder funds, so that we would council has them to utilize and track that number for future use, either a decision later on this year if need be, to help offset certain things related to COVID, or going into next year. When you look at the COVID expenses that we've tracked, we've basically looked at, similar what the eligibility requirements of the grant would be, or linked it similar to what the eligibility of the grant requirements are. Just to be able to draw a line and say how would we come up with this number. So janitorial additional costs in this year's budget is $9,000. The box implementation, remainder of that implementation for the so box is a cloud-based system for our servers, for our information to basically start to remove our dependency, reduce our dependency on our servers internally, increase our security. Materials and supplies to Fire Hall. Fire Hall has an additional $10,000 budgeted this year due to the protocols that they're required to follow for COVID from the fire commissioner. There's additional clerical to Fire Hall, similar to assist with the amount of required documentation and paperwork, and et cetera. Again, linked to the protocols linked to COVID. Virtual City Hall and Great Plains Cloud, they're both cloud-based programs that we were planning to implement this year, and the justifications are in the binders as to why. And it basically allows easier connectivity when it comes to our Great Plains for our Treasury Department, and then the Virtual City Hall provides services to the community, which doesn't require them to actually come into City Hall to do. And then the current service levels at the rec center cost approximately $450,000. That's what the COVID requirements essentially cost us for additional cleaning, et cetera, with the existing service levels at the rec center, which are a reduced service level. And when we went into the budget process, we had a conversation with council, and the direction was given that we would base the budget based on previous budget years, so in terms of costs, and align the services to those budget costs. So that's currently where we are. What we know is out of that approximate $5.7 million operating costs for the rec center, which includes an interest and long-term debt. Out of that, approximately $450,000 of that, give or take, or estimated again, is related to the COVID protocols that we have in place. The majority of it is person power, is labor. So at the $3.4 million of wages and benefits, the majority of that 450 falls into that line item to provide the existing service levels that we currently have. And that's so in total, it's 582. This was just a suggestion that council can use that as a bit of a base or a potential justification to base a decision on if they wanted to apply additional funds to this year's budget out of that 1.7 that's remaining.
Councillor Gerling?
Can you give us, or do you have the number for the estimated rec center operational costs related to COVID if service levels are increased with the intent to get them back to where we were before COVID?
It would be approximately an additional 400, just under 400,000, Councillor Gerling.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Penny, I believe in the last discussion we were having, you had suggested that maybe we utilize $500,000 to reduce the current levy. And I think I had just said 400,000. I guess the point that I would make is I would like to utilize sufficient funds that we can reduce the levy to the point where the levy is no more than what it was in 2020. And I realize there's a difference in distribution between industry and residents, but those were my thoughts. Do you have any more comment on that, Councillor Penny?
Well, looking at the numbers here, it just seems to fall pretty much in line with what I said on Wednesday. $500,000, I guess it's 582,000. It would be good, in my mind, it would be good to alleviate these extra costs brought on by COVID and leave us enough money that hopefully we can absorb any additional costs that we run into for next tax season for 2022.
And I believe that $500,000 would leave us 1.2 million that we could put out into future years to alleviate taxes or levies going forward. Councillors, are there any other comments on this? Councillor Roper.
I just have a question. Will the stabilization fund be accruing interest? Are there any options for investments to build that?
So currently all our funds in the municipality do earn interest, but if council elected to do some with those funds, we could research some options for that specific account.
Any other comments? Councillor Gerling.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Andrews was ahead of me, Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Andrews, so I missed you.
Thank you, Councillor Gerling. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm at the peace of mind here that these COVID expenses aren't going to go away in the near future, and that we have a little kitty, a little fund here of money that we can use to directly offset those COVID costs. I don't think putting a limit to an annual cost on it when we can approve it at budget time. I think it would be nice to have a little fund to sit on the books, and we've got a list here of $582,000 of extra expenses due to COVID. I think that's a perfect use for this fund. And then next year, the same thing, and so on until maybe we start putting more money into this fund. Maybe it just extinguishes itself. But I think it would be nice to have something to offset these COVID costs.
Any other comments, councillors?
Yeah.
Councillor Gerling.
Does council wish to have a discussion about increasing service levels at the rec center at this time, or do we want to reserve that for another time? I'm just thinking that I hear what everybody's saying, and I agree that I think we should have some money set aside specific for COVID costs in the future because we don't know what they're going to be. But that being said, if we can utilize funds to increase service levels at the rec center gradually throughout 2021, how does council feel about that?
Councillor Gerling, noting that we're already 2 months into 2021 and the service levels in the rec center are what they are, and we don't have any projections as to what they might be going forward, although when vaccinations, there may be lifting and everything else. That was my original question to staff was how do we go about projecting what our costs were and trying to get an accurate picture of what we might be looking at for 2021. I think they've done a good job of trying to forecast what we'll be looking at. I believe Mr. Barry said $400,000 would be if we got back to the original levels at the rec center, but 2 months of that is already gone and I don't foresee anything happening in March, and I don't know how that will look going out. But perhaps Mr. Barry, Mr. Carter, you could comment on Councillor Goring's remarks.
So in terms of a discussion for council, the council can have a discussion. I mean, that's perfectly fine. And I understand the desire to bring the rec center up to pre-COVID operational levels and service levels. I'll just make a couple comments specific to some of the challenges with that. So some areas would be challenged just because of the additional qualified staff to certification requirements and things like that to potentially get it back to previous levels. But at the end of the day, that's something that can get navigated through, but it's not just a matter of saying, let's go back to the previous levels, and we'd have obviously hiring, training, things of that nature. And one of the challenges that could occur is that if restrictions occur as you go through all that whole process and the costs associated with it, because when you start your training, you're not getting the outcome, you're just adding those extra bodies, and it takes some time to have the trained staff for us to see the result of the additional service levels. And the challenges that could be that we hope would eventually have to be undone based on restrictions being lifted. That said, an option for council too in the future here is that because as similar to last year, we don't have a crystal ball that we can rub and say what's going to happen in the future. When you have a fund like a reserve or a stabilization fund, or even surplus for that matter, the budget that council is going to approve when you actually finally approve the budget through budget deliberation sets the tax levy, which in turn sets the required taxes that the various classes pay to fund the levy, essentially, right? If 3 months or 4 months down the road or whatever that is, if council wanted to expand the service level, you do have that ability, and you can pass a resolution to pull funds and amend your budget throughout the year, right? You won't be able to tax for it, but you can pull from this fund at a later date. So example would be in June, if you want to do something, you do have the ability to do that too, or it is an option. But that said, I mean, it comes up to council in terms of the decision. The challenge, like I said, runs into, and just to comment on Councillor Andrew's comment, is we expect that we're going to have, even if COVID is behind us in 2021, or when we hit 2022, we fully expect a COVID hangover in 2022 in regards to still seeing impacts of what's occurring. So it gives an opportunity the next year to offset some of those costs for sure. So that's, again, it comes down to where council wants to provide the direction, and we'll provide what the consequences or the cost of that direction is.
So I mean, if COVID is behind us and we have to ramp up things at the rec center because we all have a desire to provide more services, it's not like we are not going to have sufficient funds to do that. We can simply utilize that fund that we're talking about here, and we can get to the service levels we'd like to see.
It comes down to, Mary, that this, and I've said it in the past, it's what service level does council wish to provide and how much you're willing to pay for it, and what's the tax base willing to bear for that, right? So that's essentially what it comes down to.
Councillor Penny.
Actually, that was just going to be my question to Mr. Barry, was to ensure that we could access these funds at a later date if we did want to ramp up levels at the rec center. So question answered.
Okay, any other comments? Oh, Councillor Roper.
Just back to Councillor Gerwing's question. How do you feel the current levels at the rec center are? I know that we reduced the levels before, and it seemed like we were leaving some user groups behind, and there was some feedback from the community that they wanted it increased. I haven't heard much since we did increase it. What is your take on that? How do you feel the public is doing with these current hours at the rec center and service levels?
Was that for me, Councillor Roper?
Yeah, I'd just like to pick your brain on that.
Well, what I'm hearing and what I'm experiencing is currently the play space isn't open on Sunday. And you know, that's problematic for working parents that only have Saturday to access it. And there's only so many spots, right? You can't just go during the opening hours. So I understand that that is being looked at, and hopefully we will see the play space being open on Sundays. But if we could get to a place where there were more spots available, because it's all got to be cleaned, and you know, I don't want to circumvent any of that, because families are feeling comfortable and safe to use that space. So that's one point. Second point is evening hours for the Aquatic Center. I have the schedule here, but I think after 6:30 or 7, and correct me if I'm wrong, there isn't anything available at the Aquatic Center in the evening. So I've heard that there's a desire to see that happening. And also recently, the climbing wall is open on Sunday as well. So that's just newly, I think only a couple of weeks now. So, and then, you know, nobody has a crystal ball. We don't know what September is going to look like, but let's just say September looks good and we can get back to having skating for the little ones, because we didn't have that this year, right? So that will be more ice time, but you know, there's going to be more people in the building, so it's going to have to be cleaned more often. So, you know, we need dollars for that. But as Mr. Barry pointed out, that they estimate that would be about $400,000 to get us back to pre-pandemic levels, assuming that the orders allow for that to happen. So yes, I'm hearing that, you know, people are very understanding, and but they would like to see service levels increased.
Councillor Souls, you're unmuted. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm just in support of the idea of putting that money in a fund that can be accessed later. And I think the discussion of, and not actually apply it to our tax levy, the discussion of expanding the services at the rec center is a very good one, and we should have that. If we can put this money away in a fund that is off to the side, we can have this discussion after budget is all over as to the service hours at the rec center and do it justice, because I think it will take quite a bit of focus to get that one taken care of. But the fund itself is large enough to accommodate the increased service level later. So let's deal with that later. Let's put the money away now and deal with the rec center after.
Thank you. Mr. Barry.
So just a couple comments just to answer some of the or to follow up on some of the discussion that Councillor King had. So the play space on March 7th will be open on Sundays. So this is that creep I talk about. As we move into the process, we're actually able to increase service levels with existing costs. With additional training, we find how to do things better, more efficiently. Purchasing of the sprayers, for example, the aeroplane sprayers has reduced the amount of cleaning times for certain things. So you know, the good news is on March 7th, the play space, which is a Sunday, will start being open on Sundays, and I believe it's 7 openings on Sundays, which will be made available to be used. And then additionally, there's an extra swim on that Sunday, I believe that's being added, and then an extra swim on Monday, I believe that's being added. So. And again, these are as we either research or work through some of the processes with the whole cleaning program. And I think we are continuing to work at trying to increase the service levels, and we're currently doing that with current costs, little marginal additional costs. I mean, I believe it was an additional 4 hours for a building service worker on Sunday to, once they were able to get everything into place, to allow the additional to get the play space open up once we finally got that. That's where we are with that currently. So we can continue to strive towards that. Some limitations regarding like swims, for example, is we still have a limitation on lifeguards. So, and there's a challenge to train lifeguards because of the challenges between what's that? And deck space, yeah. But it's a challenge to train lifeguards just due to researching existing lifeguards and stuff. We've chatted about that with council before also. So we're navigating through it, and there's going to be some other opportunities, and we will get to a point where there's no expansion of services that can occur without additional costs. We're on the cusp, but we're still eking out a little bit more of a service level with the existing costs. So.
Any other comments, councillors? All right, Mr. Barry, I'll get you to continue then your presentation.
Well, basically, it comes down to some discussion of council. Like I said, we have these, the funds that are sitting right here, right currently at approximately $1.7 million. We just provided this information as a bit of a starting point for council discussion. So that, if you were looking to apply more, this is just something you can link it to. Other than that, it comes to what other impacts do you want to see or not see. And then what we have here is the unadjusted levy, which we showed was a little bit of wasn't to that level in the binder, as we talked about during the discussion on Wednesday, because of the additional the late request from SARS, and then the TAC requests that came in, and of course in the coalition numbers there also. So this levy you see as an unadjusted levy has increased to the tune of $78,000 from what we discussed on Wednesday, based on those discussions. The 409, when you apply that, which is obviously part of the budget document, that's for the lost revenue projections, brings the levy now to 21,533, and then any additional adjustments would come off of that number. And then, as you can see down here, I have the 2019, 2020, and 2021 levy as it sits, so you can have it for reference. So now it's just looking for council direction.
So Councillor, I guess I'll go to Councillor Roper first. So Councillor Roper, are you in favor of perhaps using part of those surplus funds to reduce the levy to, well, I'll leave it open to you. How much would you like to see us use that surplus to reduce the levy?
Yeah, so I think staff did a really good job. I think they hit the nail right on the head. Our previous meeting, I spoke about not setting up an unrealistic situation where we'd have a big shock later on. And I feel that this presentation, this budget right here, reflects what I had in mind to reduce the levy somewhat, but not create that unrealistic deflation. So I'm satisfied that staff have done a great job here, and I'm perfectly content with everything that I see on the.
Councillor Gerling?
So you're asking me, okay, I'm not exactly clear on what you're asking. Are you asking me if I want to see more than the $409,000 used to reduce the levy?
Yes, we've taken the 409 out of the 2.1 million. We have a $1.7 million that we can utilize to reduce the levy if we so wish. And there's been discussion, and there's been discussion here of using that 1.7 million and spreading it out for 3 years, which is up to council how long they want to spread that out for. But there has been the proposal that we reduce the amount of the levy to the 2020 level. And I was asking for your input on that, as you know, whether you would be in favor of reducing it. And I believe, I can't see the screen, I'm getting old, but I believe it's someplace between 400 and 500 of that 1.7 million.
Okay, so as I see the screen right now, Mayor, it says the restart grant applied to offset the 2021 lost revenue at $409,000. I'm comfortable with that. I really want to see money available for expanded services at the rec center. I also believe it's imperative that we set aside money directly for COVID costs that we don't know yet, where we have no idea. So I think that this financial stabilization fund is a good idea, with the understanding that as appropriate, that we increase service levels at the rec center.
Okay, Mr. Andrews, Councillor Andrews, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I think we're all pretty much on the same page. I would just like it to be set up as a fund that gets brought up at budget time, kind of like right now, where we've got this overview of what our extra expenses to 2021 were. Council can accept it or not. We accept that, then that money will come out of that fund. Whatever we choose, that money can get used for next year for the same purposes or for adding services to the rec center. COVID costs only, but that I think can happen when council decides or proposals are made.
Councillor Souls.
Given that the part of, not all of, but part of the reason that that surplus there exists is from grant money, I think it'd be complicating to our, or risky in a sense, to use it directly as an offset in the tax assessment, because then we're moving money that was intended for COVID relief and COVID top-ups into a general revenue scenario. So I think too that it should be put off into a fund on its own and utilized for things that I can see how expanding the services at the rec center, for example, fall firmly into COVID relief. There's no reason why that. There's definitely no conflict there. Definitely no risk of it being seen as used for a purpose that it wasn't intended for. But I think it would be if we moved it into used it at all for tax reduction. So that's my take. I'd like to see.
Okay, I believe that fund, that 1.7 million, is not totally a grant to offset COVID, but is rather surpluses that we've achieved from reduction in services from COVID-19. But maybe Mr. Barry can speak to that.
So it's a combination of all the above. So there was grant funds applied last year as part of the BC Restart grant to offset expenses or revenues, which we did apply $930,000 to last year's expenses and lost revenues after the budget was approved. And then additionally, there was $660,000 worth of expenses that weren't expended. So that's combination of grant funds. So the grant funds were utilized last year. That 930 was utilized last year. That increased reduced the amount of expenses required, or from a taxation perspective, and increased surplus last year. And additionally, we had the other 660 from last year. So we've taken that and brought it forward as an option for council instead of it sitting in general surplus to go into that stabilization reserve account if council wishes to use for a future date. And then, of course, there's still a small amount of grant funds available this year to the tune of $167,000, which will be applied to, in addition to the 409 we've already applied, which will be applied to offset COVID. And then you see what we have for the rest. So it's council can use it now because it's for what they wish. It would make sense at this point to maintain a fund to help offset costs, because for future years, and council's having the right discussions, of course. But it is a combination of all the above, essentially.
Councillor Penny.
So I'm still on much similar mind, and now having the numbers in front of us, which I'm very grateful for, staff, thank you. The 409 that we're taking off is projected lost revenues for 2021. The 582.30 are projected COVID-related costs for 2021. I'd like to see us offset those costs. Now that we know that they're there, it still leaves money in the fund that we can, if we do get the open rec center for more services, the money is still there to do so. If we don't do that, it still leaves money for the following years, but it doesn't put any more burden on the taxpayer this year for COVID-related expenses. So I'd be in favor of the additional 582,300 be put in this year's budget to offset our already projected costs.
Very well. Councillor Roper.
Just one more point. Ryan had said that we could look into options for investments or to grow that account. And I think I'd like to see some options on the table at some point, just so that we're taking advantage as best we can.
Yeah, we could bring a report to council in the future regarding options on investment strategies with that.
Is there any more comments on this? Councillor Penny, did you want to make a motion then?
Yes, I would like to make a motion that we offset the projected cost of 582,300 for 2021 from this fund.
Very well. And I will second that motion. Okay,
Second.
Councillor Andrew will second that motion. All those in favor? Carried.
Okay, so your my math's not working here, but your levy will be adjusted accordingly. It's a total of 991 is what you'll be using out of that fund, which includes the 409, which the remaining value of that fund would be 1.176. And then there will be some, just once we go into the we'll adjust the document accordingly and provide that. So early next week, Ryan will start providing, or Ryan through corporate services will start providing updated information so that you can replace the information in your budget document, including the budget summary. And that's what we'll provide to as part of the budget open house and public engagement piece for council.
Can you scroll down to
Excellent.
the bottom of the document before we go? Scott, I just want to see the bottom, please.
Yep. Yep. Is that where you wanted to go, Council Growing? Is that good? Yep. Okay.
Very well. Did you want to continue on for the next 20 minutes, Mr. Barry, or are you happy with where we stopped today?
With what?
Further budget information.
Now, unless council has other questions, I mean, the question of the day was, what did you want to utilize if you want to utilize any additional funds, and if so, what it was. So we've been given our marching orders, and then yeah, that's about it. I mean, we've the sample properties, well, sample properties, but you'll see what those impacts are of your decisions too here, in terms of the value. Is that carrying property? I don't think it'll. That doesn't add up. So we're going to scroll away from that for now. We were literally touching this up just prior to the meeting, so pardon me if some of the formulas aren't carrying over. But
Are there any further questions for Mr. Barry or Mr. Carter? Very well. Hearing none. I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Oh, Councillor Penny, just a motion to adjourn? Very well. Moved by Councillor Penny, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All those in favor? Carried, and we are adjourned.